My topic is my true topic is this project of taking refuge in Sangha. But the piece of that I'm going to talk about today is co-regulation. And I included some references to it in an earlier, I think, a Thursday night talk, and it pinged with some people. And I realized I've been developing content around taking refuge in Sangha and how we regulate ourselves and how we regulate ourselves together with others, that I've been really excited to share. I think it would be an awesome one day or weekend retreat. I'm not sure if I could get anybody to show up for it, so I'm really glad you all are here today, because you can be my captive audience to hear about some of what I've been learning about taking refuge in Sangha. And I don't know, we'll see what you make of it. So I came to the concept of co-regulation through Resmaa Menakem's work, particularly my grandmother's hands. He's a trauma therapist who has also done work as a social worker. He actually came up working with military folks overseas, deployed, and then with military families back in the States. Yeah, trauma and how we regulate ourselves, how we come together to regulate ourselves are really important to his work in all these different settings that he's worked in, because because this is how we reduce suffering when we are with other people. And if we can't be with other people in a calm and settled state, that's a pretty big suffering. And in my grandmother's hands, it's interesting, he never uses the term co-regulation or self-regulation. He always uses the term the settled body. I settle my body, you settle your body, we settle our bodies together. And I can imagine why the term regulation is not going to be exactly calming for anyone who's ever been anywhere near a military setting. You know, regulations, you just say that word and everybody's blood pressure kind of shoots up a little bit. And the idea of there being a regulator, this is also not comfy. So he ditched that language, and he uses a language of settling. I will use both from time to time. I'm not a therapist. I've dipped into certain trainings to build my skill set, but that's not my background. But I really respect those of you who have those proficiencies and competencies, and so I want to use that language. And then I'll also use Resmaa Menakem's and talk about settling too. I'm going to flip back and forth between both vocabularies, but y'all are smart cookies and you'll follow. So first, let's talk about being unsettled or dysregulated. And the potentially neutral example I have of a dysregulating experience is if somebody cuts you off in traffic. Okay. And if your karma is good, or good enough, or neutral anyway, around experiences driving and being cut off in traffic, the experience of being cut off in traffic will not be a huge threat. Maybe you'll touch the brakes. You'll see how hard you need to touch the brakes to avoid a collision. You'll definitely take a closer look at the road ahead of you. You'll recognize maybe what your own circumstances were. Maybe you were just driving along and jamming to some tunes, and all of a sudden there was a car in front of you. It felt like it came out of nowhere because you weren't particularly paying attention. You didn't see them move into the lane in front of you, and so maybe that's how it happened. Or yeah, maybe they were really driving hard, and they kind of they really came in front of you. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that we can be cut off in traffic, and that will happen to us with all different levels of awareness at the time. Where our karma, and by karma I mean personal causes and conditions. I'm not talking about anything woo. It's just everything that got you here, from your genetics to the past 24 hours. Simply causes and conditions. Depending on your causes and conditions, you may have trauma around, you may have some kind of trauma that has you perhaps in a chronically dysregulated state, meaning you're sort of, your baseline is that you are anxious, a degree of tunnel vision, your blood pressure tends to be higher, your pulse is elevated, and you might be kind of chronically that way. Maybe whenever you get behind the wheel, maybe whenever you're around other people, this is going on for you. It's a very stressful, tiring state to be in. It's kind of a state of it can be a state of, I guess, mild hypervigilance, where we are defensively um, scanning our environment and interpreting the information that comes in. So what we want is the ability to when we kick into higher gear because of a threat or an experience, that could be called dysregulating, in the sense that it's probably appropriate to have that adrenal startle, pay attention response at the time of the threat. But 10 minutes later, if you're still amped up, you're probably no longer in a condition that matches your environment. Okay, so you are dysregulated to your environment, which has changed. And what you want to be able to do is when something startling or threatening happens, you want to be able to quickly regulate to changing conditions. Okay, so dysregulated would be a state where you're not well attuned with what's actually going on. You could potentially be, too calm, kind of too zoned out, or what's more likely is that you're amped up and experience some degree of this tunnel vision and disconnection from other human beings and concern about threat. We want to be able to quickly move to whatever state is appropriate to our environment. And I'm finding it's very common. I thought it was just me, and then I began practicing in community and learned, nope, it's a whole lot of us. It's very common for us to be defensively sort of dysregulated when we're in groups of people. Okay, so merely being in a group of people is enough to trigger some of these threat responses that are actually exhausting to maintain. You can do it for a few minutes, but if you have to do it for 12 hours, or if you have to do it for a full work week, you're going to be one tired kitten on, come Friday evening. It's just exhausting. And it also puts us in a state of mind that is not very skillful for dealing with people. Why? Because when we're amped up in that kind of way, when we're unsettled, I'll just say unsettled, we're kind of in a fists up mode. Like our fists may not be up, but we're ready. We are in a threat assessment mode that is it may be default fairly chronic whenever we're around people. And because of our karma, we may have very good reasons for feeling that way while we're around people. But I'm suggesting that that's the inability to regulate for whatever your circumstances actually are. It creates a lot of suffering, and then our behavior, when we act from a dysregulated, unsettled state, can create suffering for others. We can get in this big old suffering loop, and then I think it's become fairly normal for people just not to feel good when they're around other people. And I said I thought it was just me. I mean, I felt so unwell, so stressed and put upon when I was around other people, having to maintain the level of vigilance, of awareness of them, always ready with the fists up if I had to. I picked a career that let me be by myself in a room pretty much all day. I'm a studio artist primarily. And so I thought it was just me. And why did somebody who was that averse to other human beings ever come into Sangha anyway? Well, the hook was the Dharma and the chance to train with the teacher. I would not, if I could have figured out a way to train that would not have required me to ever enter a room with a group of people I didn't know, or even that I did know. Actually, it turns out knowing people, if you're in a dysregulated state, does not save you. Um, um, if I could have figured out a way to train um, and never do that, I would have, but I couldn't quite figure it out. I mean, I went as far as I could in my training, working with a teacher long distance and not participating in Sangha. You know, I rode that particular limited vehicle as far as it would go. And when I came to the end of the possibilities of training that way, I looked at my life and I said, okay, I want more. You know, I want more. I wanted more. And this is a personal thing. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I was thirsty for a bigger life than I could have in the degree of isolation that was required for me to not have to spend huge portions of my time in a dysregulated state. You know, I felt okay when I was in my studio. I felt okay when I was on my cushion by myself. Put me in a room with a bunch of people, you know, and I just began to want the life possibilities that involved other people. And so that's why I was willing to move into the training and to begin to learn about taking refuge in Sangha. I would have told you at the beginning, it's impossible for me. You know, I'm here for Buddha, I'm here for Dharma, and I'm going to get through this Sangha business as best I can to get the training I want. But I did start paying attention to how this stuff went down. And a big turning point was when I read Resma Menacem's My Grandmother's Hands. And he is I mentioned him before, he's a trauma therapist and anti-racist activist, and he wrote a book with some very generous chapters trying to help people figure out how to settle their bodies enough so that they could settle with one another, so that they could enjoy a more constantly settled state from which skillful action is far more possible. And he also looked at his own cultural resources and heritage for how to do this. And he grew up in the Black church in the United States, which has any number of traditional religious practices that exactly facilitate coming together with other people and settling the body individually, as a group. And from his trauma therapist point of view, he looked at these religious practices. He extracted from them a number of exercises that any group could do if they had sufficient familiarity and trust with one another. And he presented those exercises in this book. It's chapter 14 if you want. And I have to say, most of the exercises, I couldn't handle them. I mean, I just thought about, I was reading the book and working through it with a group of Buddhists that I liked. And we were there for the same reasons, to work on making our city a better place for everyone to live. And, I couldn't imagine a group of people I was more aligned with, but some of the co-regulation practices he offered, humming together, standing together and everybody humming at the same time, standing together, everybody humming and touching your belly. Simply sitting together in silence. I mean, a bunch of these things, I was like, that's not going to work for us. That it's just going to feel too weird, and I don't want to do it. And I don't want to stand around with people that I couldn't imagine feeling comfortable enough to do that with anybody. But there's got to be a way, because people need to be able to, at this point, I understood what he was offering is to take refuge in Sangha. And so I pivoted and I looked at our Zen forms, and lo and behold, it was all right there. All of these, the same kinds of traditional practices that Resma Menachem identified in the Black churches he grew up participating in, were right there in our own Zen forms, just waiting for us. Really the only missing piece to have the awareness of how these forms work to help us settle our bodies together, was the awareness that these forms would help us to settle our bodies. It doesn't take much more than knowing that it can happen for it to begin to happen if you're willing. And I wanted to read a little bit of Resma's argument for why this project of settling the body is so important. He points out that our public discourse, our media, our institutions all tend to act to shape our behavior by unsettling our bodies far more than they help to settle them. And no details necessary. You can fill in from your own experience there. He says the first step in changing this dynamic is settling our own bodies one by one. I think there's some truth there. We do learn to sit. We take up a sitting practice. We begin to learn to take refuge in Buddha. He says the next step is bringing that settling out into the world and getting our bodies in sync with others. Because a settled body, yes, it helps other bodies to settle. And there's this magic thing that happens, and when the context is right and it's appropriate, settled bodies will also begin to harmonize. And as we support people in healing or working with their own trauma and settling with one another and developing the capacity to harmonize, that harmonizing turns into culture. And I will say in the past, the time I've spent working with students here in Louisville, I see that beginning to happen, that we're making moves around Sangha culture that absolutely reflect the fact that, yes, we settle together. So it's we're able increasingly to come together, even for a prolonged period of time, like a half-day retreat, and not leave the space exhausted because we've been in a dysregulated, state the whole time where we're ready to go fists up. I believe I'm seeing, and I'm also hearing practitioner reports about this, that they and I have not gone fishing for these reports. I'm hearing them a bit spontaneously, but that their ability to settle in groups of people that are not our practice Sangha, but just out in their lives, seems to be increasing. They find themselves relaxing, and who knows, even joking or smiling in group settings where that never would have happened in the past. So I'm hopeful, and I'm also encouraged enough to show up and start talking about this to you all. All right. So practices in our Sangha that allow us to settle our bodies with one another. Chanting together, we do that. It's normalized, and it would feel really weird if I tap three of you all on the shoulder and asked you to stand in a circle and hum with me. Okay, that would be weird. But we're already over the threshold of weirdness when we've come into Zen spaces and learned the forms enough to participate, right? We're already past that. We get it that we're going to be chanting together. We get it that we're going to be sitting in silence together. We get it that we're going to be walking together. So we've already gotten past that, oh, this is a weird thing to be doing with a group of people. And, we're already in the practices that we can use that will help us to co-regulate with awareness that it can happen. But I see co-regulation happening, okay, in the chanting, in the sitting together, particularly in the moving meditation. And I call it that rather than kinhin or walking meditation, because some of our Sangha members do not walk. So we have forms that allow them to participate from their seat. What I notice, speaking from the teacher seat, is that if you're working with students who are co-regulating, who are settling as a group, they are so easy to teach. It's unbelievable. I mean, I can't tell you. I really recommend it. Like, this is how you be with a group of people to, if you can be taking refuge in Sangha, it sure makes taking refuge in Dharma a lot easier. And the same thing with our meditation, with taking refuge in Buddha, to the extent that we are all, from the moment we enter the door, settling our bodies with the bodies of the other people in the space. It is just so much easier to sit it and hit it. We hit the cushion and we're kind of ready to go. We're ready to do our work, whatever that is going to end up being for that period of time there. So those are the major forms. I wanted to at least touch on the barriers. One barrier is simply not knowing about this thing that can happen with settling our bodies with others. If you don't know about it, you don't know to look for it, you aren't aware of it. It is perfectly possible to come to a meditation practice or come to retreat, and when that bell rings for Kinhin and you hear the blocks, to shuffle around the room in a shut down, tunnel vision, dysregulated, fists up kind of state. I've done it. I've seen people do it. I know that's real. So how then to invite people to use that time to settle their bodies with other people? And all of my examples are from the animal realm. And it turns out that's a really powerful realm to work with people in when you suspect that there's karmic conditioning, when you suspect there's trauma at play that's causing this tendency to dysregulate around other people. The two metaphors I use, and my Louisville folks are probably tired of hearing this, but I'll never get tired of saying it, are schooling fish and flocking birds. Okay, if you think about how those animals gently coordinate their movements so that they can flow as a group in the sky overhead, or if we're able to ever see a school of fish moving in the water, they are not lockstep synchronizing their little wing beats or fin flaps. That is not how they do it. They do it through gentle awareness of the other fish and the other birds that are around them. They may take directional cues from the fish or the birds that are closest to them, and so they're all constantly gently adjusting their trajectories in order to stay part of the flock or the school. But they're not doing it through any kind of sort of gross attempt to march or to move in unison. That's not how it works. They're just gently taking in the soft focus information. And so when you do moving meditation, or really at any time, a soft focus awareness of the people around you, checking out what they're doing, how they are in the space, what are their energy levels, what's their body language like, what's up, what's going on for them, is a way to you tune in and you are aligned to what's going on with the group. And I've come to believe that in our contemporary culture, there is a whole undervalued and often inactivated part of our mind that's activated simply by asking it to, by awareness, that exactly is responsible for this business of settling our bodies with other bodies. And to the extent that we welcome that and we begin to look for opportunities to co-regulate with others, it will kick in and start working. And it happens very quickly. I see it happen for students literally on the first ask. I describe this thing of, why are we walking in a circle together? Well, think of it like we're not marching in lockstep. We are like schooling fish, flocking birds. We are gently moving around in the same direction, approximately the same pace. And that's all the instruction I give. And that seems to be enough. Last but not least, if you are in a situation where you don't have a Sangha to sit with and to practice it at your grocery store. It will, it's almost miraculous in how it turns a very stressful, harrowing trip into the grocery store to get what you need, especially if you end up there on Saturday morning or during rush time, into an experience that can almost be blissful, to be honest. As this part of my brain kicks in, I'm kind of aware of how other people are moving through the aisles and where their energy levels are, what's going on for them. It's a very easy, gentle kind of awareness to maintain. You can keep it going 24/7, unlike hypervigilance, which will burn you out so fast. But this kind of awareness, taking refuge in Sangha, you can really do it all the time. All right, I have talked too long, but I had some things I wanted to say, and let's do some discussion. And thank you all.